So Jessica Yellen, what's the latest? What are you hearing?
Hey, Anderson. Well, they are a long way from a deal, but late today, Speaker Boehner and President Obama did speak to one another on the phone. Now, this is an important development because it's the first time they've talked in a week about the fiscal cliff. I am told, though, that there was no real progress in negotiations in this sense. There was no breakthrough on that central point of tax rates. As you know, President Obama insists there is no deal unless the GOP agrees to raise rates on the top 2% of earners. The GOP says that is a non-starter, and the two men have not moved from that basic position. Now, all of this comes at the same time that Treasury Secretary Geithner also said for the first time that the administration would be willing to go over the fiscal cliff if the GOP does not agree to raise those rates. This was Treasury Secretary Geithner earlier today on CNBC.
Administration prepared to go over the fiscal cliff?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, again, we see there's no prospect to an agreement that doesn't involve those rates going up on the top 2% of the wealthiest Americans. Remember, it's only 2%. And remember, all those Americans, too, get a tax cut into that framework on the first $250,000 of their income. So in some sense, it's a tax cut for all Americans.
Bottom line, Anderson, we're talking today, but we're still at stalemate.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sign, Jessica and Dana, of just how little progress there's been, that a phone call is big news between these two. Dana, we're also hearing some hints of some movement among Senate Republicans, Tom Coburn, Susan Collins, Olympia Snowe. What are you hearing? How significant is it?
Well, it's significant for a couple of reasons. One is, you're right, that these altogether three Republicans in different ways suggested that they would be okay with what most Republicans are saying that they're not okay with, which is raising tax rates for the wealthiest. Tom Coburn is probably the most significant because he's the most fiscally, or just conservative in general, not just fiscally, and the fact that he broke with his party. The others have sort of gone along with this in some way, shape, or form in the past, but I think it's significant because the way these things kind of tend to go is that there is a little bit of a crack, and then that tends to send other cracks into the what is now a solid opposition of Republicans to raising rates on the wealthy. So we'll see how that goes. However, I think it's really important to underscore that we're talking about Senate Republicans, and the key thing that we have to watch is House Republicans, because if something can't get through the House, which still has a very big majority of Republicans, then it can't get through Congress. So those are the class of Republicans we really need to watch.
David Gergen, what do you make of the situation? I mean, do you think we're any closer to a deal?
I think we might be, Anderson. I think, listen, the political theater of all of this certainly suggests we're a long, long way from there. And when Erskine Bowles says there's only 1 in 3 chance we're going to be successful in avoiding the fiscal cliff, you have to pay attention. When Geithner and other Democrats are saying we're willing to go over the cliff, and that's a growing sentiment within the party, you have to think, wow, this is really going to not happen. But if you look at the underlying conversation between them on the substance of it, here we have a Republican Party that for 22 years has uniformly opposed tax increases. And now John Boehner has said not only we're putting the $800 billion on the table, but we're going to aim it at the rich, and the rich are the ones who are going to pay. That's what he said today. And yesterday, President Obama said something that was very, very important. He offered the outlines of a deal that might work with Republicans, and that's something we talked about on your show a couple of nights ago, Anderson, and that is raise the rates now, and then engage in the conversations next year on tax deductions and loopholes, and that's called base broadening. And base broadening in the past has been attached to lowering the rates. That's what happened back in 1986 with tax reform. So what the president is saying is there is a way possibly we could raise the rates temporarily, but through further reform that you guys say you're interested in, we could lower them back down again next year.
David, you've been pretty critical of the president and fellow Democrats. I mean, do you still think they're overplaying their hand here?
I think that there are people around the president who are more interested, or at least have a strong interest in using this as a way to humiliate Republicans, as a way to really push them to the brink as opposed to negotiating. I think we'll have to wait and see how it plays out. I do think, Anderson, that what we've seen with second-term presidents in the past, and the great scholar Richard Neustadt wrote about this a long time ago, there is a danger in second terms of hubris, of excessive pride in the White House. I think we're seeing some hints of that, but I think it's unfair to totally label it that way. Let's let us see this play out a little more. I believe they have enough to go into private negotiations right now. If both sides continue to refuse, I do think it's the president's responsibility. He is the leader of all the people, and I think the country is getting tired of watching two sides say, "You go first." No, you go first. It's sort of Alphonse and Gaston role. They need to both get off that, sit down, and get something worked out.
Jessica, from the White House perspective, though, I guess they feel they were burned before that, and they're trying a different strategy this time. Is that right?
Sure. You remember last summer during the debt talks, the president was accused of negotiating, putting his compromise position on the table first, of selling out Democrats, of negotiating against himself. And so he's doing the opposite this time, doing exactly what he was criticized for not doing last time, and he's being slammed for it as well. So White House officials shrug their shoulders every time we go to them, asking if they're engaging in overreach. One of the reasons, Anderson, that they say they are not negotiating with the Republicans on the rest of the issues, why won't they just put this question of tax rates aside and then discuss everything else and come back to tax rates? They say it's because everything else is easy. They've gone through all of this during the debt talk discussions, and they know how this will get done. It can be done very quickly. The one issue for them is this tax rates, and so they say if the Republicans break on that, when they break on it, they believe they will, then everything else gets done very quickly. Of course, the Republicans see it differently. I'll just add, Anderson, quickly on that point David Gergen just made. The White House explicitly came out today saying, point blank, they do want a two-step process for tax reform. Raise the rates on the top 2% to 98 to the Clinton levels now, and let next year be a time for negotiating rates for the future, and maybe everybody could lower the rates for everyone during that time.
Dan, I mean, how much of this do you think is just, public posturing and kind of bloviating on partisan cable channels? Because it does seem like there's a lot of that going on.
Of course. I mean, so much of this is public posturing and bloviating. But I think that the difference between what we're seeing now and what we've seen in past high-stakes negotiations like this is you have the public posturing, the bloviating, and then you have the private, okay, guys, let's roll up our sleeves and, really talk about what's going on. By all accounts, that's not happening right now. I mean, just like you said, the fact that it's news that the president and the speaker had their first phone conversation, which got nowhere, in a week, is really amazing, and it speaks to the lack of the real conversations going on behind the scenes. But I will say that, back to what David and Jessica were saying, David particularly about the fact that the question about whether the White House and the Democrats in general are overreaching. Look, when Timothy Geithner says today that he's willing to go over the cliff, he's saying it because, yes, it's posturing, but he also is saying it because he means it. And Democrats here have been telling us this for a long time, for months and months and months before this was even close to the front burner, this issue. They say they realize that they have the leverage because if at the end of the day, Republicans don't agree to anything, all tax rates are going to go up, and they firmly believe Republicans are going to get blamed. And it was very obvious listening to the speaker today. I was at that press conference talking to him that they understand that they're losing the message war on this. That's why he made a point to say it's not that we're not for raising taxes on the wealthy. It's just the difference over rates.
David, it's so interesting how things have changed. I spoke with George Mitchell last night on the program, and I'm about to speak with Senator Trent Lott. Both have written op-eds. And in talking to them, it's like talking to adults because they're talking about the way it was even 5 or 6 years ago, where people actually, had meetings with each other on opposite sides and knew each other and didn't just kind of disappear and to their opposite corners and fly away to their home districts. They actually compromised. It's amazing to me how much things have changed just in the last couple of years.
It's true, Anderson. It's dramatic, and and I think there's a lot of blame to go around here. I don't want to try to push it one way or the other, but they're seeing Bob Dole on the floor yesterday of the Congress on the disability question, and remembering how Bob Dole and George Mitchell, how much they respected each other, how much they worked together, how much they both wanted to negotiate. There was a sense in the Senate especially, but even in the House some years ago, that the purpose of being there was to make progress for the country. And yes, you made your arguments loud and clear, but at the end of the day, you sat down and negotiated it out because that's what the country needed. And now there's this willingness to keep trying to pin the political blame on the other side, keep trying to push the other side, making sure they get the blame if this thing goes down, rather than sort of saying, how do we make sure we don't go down?
Yeah. David, we'll leave it there. Dana Bash, Jessica Yellen, appreciate your reporting.